Good Monday evening, good peoples. Hope you're all doing well. Let's jump in here to Rex. And I added a little twist here because I'm surprised somebody didn't ask me. They asked me indirectly in other spreadsheets, etc. No, thank you, Adobe. Okay, so I'm showing the current distribution across Rex's MSII, COII, NVII, and TSII. And I thought I would do a current distro, right? So MSII paid 0.0796, which represents a 20.72% yield. And we refer to that sometimes as yield on cost. In other words, if it stayed the same price as it is when they declared this and they paid out every week, then that's the distribution yield you would have at the end of the year. Well, it never works out that way, but you always have to see that. So when they do their little sheet, they put yield, right? Well, it's really, think of it as current yield or yield on the current cost based on what this payment is. So I thought I'd do a little tracking and just say, what's the previous? Well, okay, so MSII, which hasn't been doing particularly well, but none of the MicroStrategy based Bitcoin, right? The poor words. All of the geez, Bruce, all of the MicroStrategy based underlying ETFs are not performing equal to the BTC ones. And in general, now BTC is off its highs. Okay. So what did it change? Well, it changed in a little more than a penny. So that's minus 2.74 in the yield. Last week's yield was 23.46. Today's is 20.72. So I've made these red before, but people have made comments that red doesn't show up well and to change the red. The problem is I'm using the brightest red in the color palette, and it's just the black and red. And you know what the reality is? It depends on what they're looking at it on. If you're using YouTube TV, then your TV screen doesn't have the same kind of density of resolution, maybe the way it's interacting with the pixels that a monitor does. Why do you think you pay a lot more for a high res monitor than you do for the same size TV? So there are just so many unknowns there, guys. But I always try and address it. And so down here, I thought I'd just use orange. So somebody said, why are you using orange? Green really pops, but the red kind of fades into the background. I played around. We'll see. So minus 274. How about the Coinbase fund, COII, from Rex's standpoint? Well, they dropped less than a penny, only 0.79. So that's a consistent 12 cents, 11 cents. This was 9 cents, call it 8 cents. How about the NVIDIA? Oh, the biggest drop of all, guys. As I said to people, NVIDIA is displaying a head and shoulders, not an inverse head and shoulders, which is positive, right? With the head being below and the two shoulders above, it's just the opposite. So I don't even know what NVIDIA did yesterday. I'm not daily tracking it, but the technicals don't look good on NVIDIA. It looks to me like NVIDIA wants to go down from here. It looks like the NAS wants to go down, the NASDAQ. It doesn't matter what it does one day. What's the overall trend? Seems to me that institutional money's been selling and the retail public is still FOMOing in by the dip. This is all going to sort out, okay? We got the Fed cut, but guys, that's baked in, all right? So any day we could turn and go south. Is that an absolute? No, nobody can really predict exactly, but you get probabilities. So anyway, look at this. 50, almost 52% down, went from a 55-cent payout to a 23, call it 24. All right, how about Tesla, which is, technically oversold, right? That's why it's in a way been performing and bouncing better. So these two stayed pretty consistent. This was only down a little bit more on the MicroStrategy based one, but big time on the NVIDIA ones. So we have the Tesla fund paying 893 versus, whoops, why would that give me a negative number? C minus 20. Oh, then that must mean that the underlying went up. That's why. So when you have a bigger payment, but the underlying moves up, then your yield is less than it was over here. That's what throws it. See, that yield is basing, that's why I say yield on cost, right? So it in fact went down. All right, let's jump into the individual stuff. Again, guys, I'm doing 5,000 things. I don't have time to update the dailies, but I do go in and update all the competitors' data over here. And let's just be fair, okay? I always, because I badmouth Yomax at times, there's things that I just don't like about what they do, how they do it, and I call them out. They still have some virtues, they still have some positives, but you got to look for it. You got to understand what you own, you got to understand how they operate. And people hate it when I say the underlying does better because I look at it like I get it, you need income, but you give up a lot with that income. If you're super making it up, you're super bullish on NVIDIA, you think it's still going to go from its 4.1 trillion market cap to 20 trillion. And you just think it's the dominant player in the world and you want income. Well, that's all great if that pans out. If it does nothing but for the most part, higher highs and higher lows and just keeps running, you're going to get your 35, 40% chunk of money from Yilmax, but you're going to give up that other 60%, 65% of the upside because you played an income path versus a growth path. So just know that. I'm not telling you which one, but people think it's the only way. And I call it the lazy way because guess what? The reality isn't so. NVIDIA is going to run up. Okay. And you're going to collect 35% of that run up and it's going to get distributed to you as income. And then guess what? When it goes down, you're going to go down 90 to 95%. Okay. So if you start going down more than you're going up, you're screwed. And that's what a lot of people are facing. And you're going, man, I've been in the fund for 4 months and my NAV's down. I've been paid. And then they start looking at my total return and they start understanding. But sometimes they just take that mentality of, and we've all been caught doing that. Let's say I was in Misty in the heyday and I paid $20. Well, in 8.3 months, I got the $20 back. So, quote, I'm house money, I'm riding for free. So you're just going to ride forever. But let's say, and I'm not saying this is true, let's say MSTR is never going to recover and Misty's going to slowly go down to $1. So what do you really own? So at some point, it's opportunity cost, right? So you got all your money back and you're still collecting dividends. But as MSTY goes down, your distribution size goes down. If they paid you $2 consistently before, average $2.4, right? Every month. Now maybe they're averaging $1. How long before they're averaging 50 cents or 30 cents? Again, you have to be the judge where it's going, but don't just say, I'm house money now and I'm going to ride it forever, assuming that it's a $2.4 a month payer, which it clearly isn't anymore. Okay. Not saying that it can't recover. I know you guys saying, but just be realistic. Don't just say because it's house money, I'm letting it ride. Now, if you're in a massive bull market, okay, and you really think BTC is going to pull MSTR and everything else up, then okay, do that. Choose that path. But I know a lot of you are frustrated. I get those comments. You're frustrated in the Conies and the Misties and now Nvidia is probably really lately been the best of all of them, but technically doesn't look very good to me for now. So why did I even go on this diatribe and rant? Well, more of it is I did an estimate over the weekend. I think I had 57 cents, something like that. I don't remember exactly, but it's way down. So I wanted to be fair because here we are Monday night, and on Wednesday morning they're going to declare they're a monthly. Everybody else on this list is weekly. So they're getting their distribution. So I don't want to penalize them and make them look any worse than they maybe already are. So I said, all right, here's a 60-cent payment, right? And then I'll adjust it after the actual. I did it for Tesla. I gave Tesla like a 50-cent payment. Well, they only ended up paying 0.393. So I corrected it, right? But I just want to show you that I'm being fair here because that's how I'm not being fair in a way to NVDW, the round hills. Everybody else is in the middle of their week cycle. They're like another couple of days away from declaring. Well, that's not true. They don't really declare these till Friday, I think. But the point being, on the weeklies, I don't worry too much about it. But on a monthly, I want to give them as much as I can, the benefit of the doubt. All right. So let's go and then the comparisons will show everything. The only thing I'm not doing right now, just due to time and load and all the things that I'm doing, is doing these dailies. Who's performing better on a given day? Well, the comparison summary is more important. All right, guys. So who's paid? So NVII paid the Granite shares last time 0.473. This is the new payment for REX, right? 0.2392, down from their 0.55, which is what I just showed you in that sheet down there. That's substantial, right? It's like almost 52% reduction, right? If it would be 27 and a half, and it's only 23 if it was a 50% only. So NVDW's last payment is 0.438. Friday, we'll get a new Thursday night, Friday morning, we'll get another one for them. NVIDII, we will have on Wednesday prior to the market, so I'm giving them 60 cents. All right, let's go through the next one. How's our batch of MicroStrategy? Well, Misty is still a ways away. It just probably over 2 weeks, right? So Group D happened. We're now declaring for Group B, so they got to wait. They got a few weeks. So their last payment was 109, which I think they overpaid, but they don't really want to see Misty drop below $1 psychologically. Well, the fund's not really recovering. It's staying in the $15 range. All right. So IMST, the big payer, right? They're a monthly. These two guys are monthlies and these are weeklies. So they're still looking good because when they do pay, they paid that 701, almost $2, almost $3, $3.50, you know. So they're kind of winning this competition just by making these big payments. Is that a return of capital to you and they really aren't doing well? Well, we'll find out over time, right? So you also have then REX. What did REX do? Which is the topic of this video. As I mentioned, they went down to roughly 8 cents from 9 cents. And then MST is also weekly. Now remember, this guy is the big leverage. In a pure bull market, this 200% is really going to fly. In a flat to down market, it's awful. They're going to erode. They're going to, their NAV is going to decrease. They're going to throw their weekly payments out, which they're doing. But look what's happening too. Those are declining typically, right? Got up to 35. This is the first time we've seen a 15-cent payment. Why? Because what's their stock down to like 10? I mean, I bought 100 shares just to own it, right? What did I pay? 20, mid to high 21s. Last I looked, it's 10. We'll look on a sheet and see what the active price is. But it's brutal in terms of that. But I knew really not to be in any of the MSTR based funds. Still got my BITO, still got some YBTC, right? Because I'm bullish on BTC. It hasn't been doing much, but I'm still bullish on it. All right, guys. How about coin? Remember, the summaries you get to see who the real winners are. Just talking about the distribution. So over here, we have 3 weeklies and 2 monthlies, right? So we have COII. Everybody knows YieldMax on their core long-term funds are still monthly. And then you have ICOI, the Bitwise, right, who has these outside payments. $5, right? But when they're monthly, they're in the middle. Neither one of these have a pending payment. Okay. So we got 54 cents from Granite. Again, Granite pays very well. They NAV erode more because of those payments, not unlike YieldMax. Okay. So on Round Hill, they're in between, right? This Friday, Thursday night, depending, we will get a new payment. So they're the next one to get a payment here of anybody. So then REX paid 11 cents versus its 12 cents. Not down much, right? So we have all that. So let's jump to all of the comparisons and I'll explain to you. To me, this is the value, right? This is a true who's winning type scenario. Well, if we look up here, we got the underlying. I know you guys don't like to hear that. Well, sometimes a fund will outperform the underlying. So that's okay. So you got a bunch of 219s because that's when Round Hill launched their first 5. Remember now, Round Hill has 15 single stock funds. Okay. Almost every one of those, I believe every one of those YieldMax has. So those are easily compared. But the problem is if the newer ones only have 4 or 5 payments on the weekly, and you have monthlies over on YieldMax for most of those. So those comparisons aren't as good. But the 5 that have been there since 2019, it's easy to come out and try now and do NVDW versus NV DY. And, to be honest, they're neck and neck, right? If you just look at those, you're slightly ahead on NVDW than you are on NVDY. And remember, I gave them the benefit of the doubt and included their 60-cent payment, right? And again, could it well be below 60? Yeah. If it's 65, they'll get 5 more cents, right? If it's 50, they're going to drop 10 cents. But NVII, again, but is this? It's not equal comparisons. That's the problem. So what do? I make it as equal as I can down here with everybody, and you don't need to see NVIDIA in that one. So who's kind of winning that? It's close because I gave NVIDIA its 60 cents, which it may not earn that much. Possibly it gets a few pennies more, but I still have REX winning in total, right? Now, between the two, this is the big distributor in NVIDIA, right? Its NAV is not as much. So over on REX, you get the upside. You don't get as big a payment, but they're still winning in the equals. All of this since 528. Not that long. So as time goes, we're going to be able to compare. But guys, I ask you, again, I know some of you need income. Are you looking at the metals? Are you looking at what I talk about? I'll show you my Patreon down at the bottom. We are killing it, guys. Just absolutely killing it. It's reminiscent of the AI, FOMO, and all that stuff into the metals. This isn't about to stop, guys. We're in the 3rd inning of a 9-inning ball game in the super commodity cycle. It's not only precious metals and miners, it's energy, it's uranium. It will become oil. Oil's a follower. Oil's down. Oil could go down to $50 from $60. But I know where oil is headed. It's natural gas. Uranium is blowing up again. One of the most high movers when it moves. We had a big upcycle. Then we turned around and we went down for 6 or 8 months. It was brutal. Now we're high flying again, guys. You need to expand your horizons. There's not always huge income funds. Defiant's a perfect example. They had a 2x uranium, and they launched it, and within a month, uranium was in that bear market, that retrace. It ran way up, pulled way back. They had to close the fund. People were getting destroyed in a 2x and a big move down. Now they don't have the upside, right? So those are the things that I talk about. So you almost have to be a trader to be most efficient living in these income funds. And it's exactly what people don't want to do because they're working. They're trying to supplement their income with the income funds, but they don't understand the bull and bear cycle and the dynamics of the market and where the market's going. The retail sector, okay, guys, the smart money moves in early, then the institutions move in, and then finally the public FOMOs into it, and usually the eighth inning. My minor videos don't get much. There's stuff that I put out in May, late May, and then again in early June on my minor videos. Yeah, some of you watched them. Most of those stocks are up 80 and 100 and 120%. But most of you are FOMOing over, and now you're down the money that you put into a yield max or something else in the same time interval. So all I say to you is, I get it. Now we at least, I mean, I said to you even 2 years ago when GDX launched, and somebody said, well, Bruce, but it's down $4 since its launch. Well, duh. What do you think Misty is since its launch? It's down $4. Yeah, I know Misty's except it ran really great and paid. I was there. I had a lot of money in Misty. I was collecting a lot of income, but I knew likely where things were going. So all I'm saying is open your eyes to what's going on here, and don't be completely dogmatic and say I just have to have income, because then what you do is you jump around to the funds, right? You go from SMCY, you follow the high yield and you get burnt every time you flip, right? Then you jump over to Coinbase because it just ran. Well, now it's retracing. You jump over NVIDIA, it did well. Well, now it's very likely retracing. Look, guys, the markets are fickle. I mean, could we run up another 20 or 30% in the NASDAQ? Yeah. But guess what? If it does that, if it continues up from where it's at, another 20% it'll be a blow off top, and it'll be disastrous on how hard it will fall. I don't think it's going to go that high, but could it go higher? You got the Tom Lees and you got all the proponents that everything's going to run, right? And that's kind of what's going on. The metals are running, the dollar's going down, the markets, the rate cuts. But listen, guys, they don't cut rates because the markets are in a good situation. They cut rates because they see a recession. We're very likely are in a recession. If you look at defaults on car loans, on mortgages, right? The debt levels, the margin levels, we're at the highest margin levels ever. Okay. That's not the sign of a bull market with 40 or 50% left in it, in the tank. But it can be a bull market in other sectors. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing in my Patreon, and it's taking a lot of my time. But we're making a lot of money there, and we're having fun in that, because that's a third inning of a 9 inning to run. Does that mean at some point we won't have a big retrace? No, of course, it's volatile. But that's what I educate in there. It's almost like you've got people out there telling you when to DCA in and how to trade these, yield max and round hills and all that. I could certainly do that and have done that. But I'd much rather just be in a third inning of a 9 inning ball game that I know is going to run for multiple years. I think the opposite's going to happen in a lot of the AI and NASDAQ and FOMO. There'll be some winners. Certainly, AI is not dying. But remember, almost finished with my rant, guys. Remember, the same thing happened to the NASDAQ, guys. The NASDAQ was at 5,000 going into 2020. I lived in the industry. I was making huge money as one of the four horseman companies that I had a management position in. I had stock options. I was killing it, right? Making tons of money. And the crash came. I didn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. I was like, no, the internet's the future. This is where it's going. Well, it was the future till it wasn't. Okay. And then it, out of those ashes, became the future. So I'm not so sure that we don't have a cleansing in all of the AI cycle, even a beloved stock of mine like a Palantir. These things can get crushed only to resurrect and have the few select and the winners, right? If you were looking at Amazon in that time, I don't have the chart in front of me, but I'm sure Amazon was crushed in that when the NASDAQ went from 5,000 to 1,000. It took 15 years to recover. But the good companies is exactly what they did. You have to have a washout when there's too much FOMO in everything. Now, what are these income funds' responsibility? They just throw new funds. If you get frustrated with Misty, they got Ulti for you. Okay. If Ulti starts NAV eroding on you, then they put Salty out in inverse, and there'll always be new ones. But guys, most income people want to set it and forget it. They don't want to be traders. They got jobs. They need 5 jobs for the income they really need. And I feel bad for that sector because you're like sheep being led to the slaughter. It's not a magic fix. The fact that you can get 40 or 50% yield, if that was true, Warren Buffett would be out of business. Do you think Warren Buffett wouldn't be in these big time? He lives on a 15% gains. Of course, he had inside information. He knows a lot of things, but he knows the danger that there's no magic bullet. You know, Misty was fantastic when it was getting 100%, increase in the NAV and paying you over 100%. But guys, if that was the case year after year after year, nobody would be in anything in the world except for Misty. Overcrowded trades don't work forever. All right, guys, done with my rant. All right, so we covered the NVIDIA funds. Let's go to the Tesla fund. So the winner is NVII. So on Teslas, what do we got? We got a bunch of 219s, and then we got REX at 6.4 because that's when REX came out. So is 33.52 really good? Hard to tell, isn't it? It's not equal time in the market. How'd the other funds do? Well, the underlying kind of won. Well, I take it back. Tesla did about as well as the underlying. So good on you, Max, on Tesla. Okay. Granite got destroyed here. They're the highest payer, but they're the highest NAV reduction. But then let's take a look down here. How about just 6.4? See how uneven these things are? Well, let's only look at 6.4. So who wins this thing? Rex is close. They've been winning. And actually, it's not the way I like to see a winner come up. But at 36, 37, not a huge margin, okay, over Rex. And look at this. They got 73% NAV erosion. But guys, they paid you 110% of the money over 97 calendar days. Now, this fund for them is their long-term fund. And granted, all the other funds that are single stocks, not index funds, right? They've got their YSPY and their QQ, TQQY, their NASDAQ and S&P 500. And those were there. but all their other granite ones are new, right? They're COII and all of that. So this one barely won, but it won, right? And then you've got TSLP from Curve. Curve isn't in a lot of these because they don't have that many funds to compare. But I did a lot of work with them, interviewed their CEO. You know, for a stable, less income payment percentage wise, they're much more stable with their NAV. And that shows up here as well. Look at Tesla when we compare all five from just 6.4. Not so good. So TSLW is out yielding them, going down a little more on the NAV. And TSII is just not eroding you, right? So one could argue, again, you pick the one you want out of there. All right, let's go to MSII. Same kind of setup, right? Hasn't been performing particularly well. You got funds launched on 4, 5, and 6, right? April, May, and June. Makes it hard to compare. And then you got Misty, which I just set so that it would be equivalent to um, Oh, to Round Hill, but Round Hill's fund is so new, I didn't put it in here. But I did down here. So I made everybody 6.4, and then I can't make, Round Hill when they finally got their MSTR based fund out. So your winner here, okay, out of the four looking at 6.4 is Bitwise, IMST. And they really win that because, well, look at this. Misty outpaid them, I was about to say. So these are neck and neck, right? 58 versus 59 on your payment percentage. But again, Misty erodes more, right? It's got a 7% more erosion and only less than 1% more on the payment. So your 887 wins. They're all negative, right? As I said to you 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I wouldn't own any of them. I sort of look at it from my YouTube, my 100 shares that I threw into MST is less than, 1/10 of 1% of my portfolio. So I'll write it off to my YouTube expenses. All right, so MSTW, and to be honest, I'm ultimately bullish on BTC, but I'd rather be in BTC funds than I would in MSTR funds until it shows me that it can get back to the old MSTR. All right, so that's kind of the winner. This is too new, guys. It can't really, not the same time in the market. All right, so that's the winner there. MSII would be second, and then Misty third. And MST. Why does MST get destroyed? I think most of you know. If MSTR exploded up, MST is going to win the percentages every week because it's 200% leverage. But on the way down, it gets destroyed. But it's not that much more destroyed than Misty. Look at this. Equal time, 88 to 74. Outpays. All right. So let's go to the final category, guys. And there's my Patreon if you're interested in that. I'm having a lot of fun over there. We're having a lot of success. I'm working hard on content there. Once in a while, I do a video on the metals for the general public on there. But remember, these are paying tiers. So it's not fair for me to give any of my recommendations and individual stocks to anybody on the YouTube channel. So you need to go over there if you want to see what all is happening. All right, COII, the Coinbase funds. Well, let's go look at them here. So the last payment for Granite was 54 cents, down from the 80s and 70s and 60s, but still a very good payment. And then you had Round Hill, its payment last week was 57. We'll see what and it had been up to $1.07. I tell you why I like them, why I don't like COII and Misty, even if they're performing. I no longer like to wait for the month because of the volatility in the market. I can get a couple payments in, and if I see it tanking, then I can just sell it and plan to buy back in if I think it's going negative. When I'm in a Misty or Coney, it's like I want to wait for that payment. I don't know how bad it's going to be. I don't know if Misty's going to pay 30 cents or a dollar. And I think once they break that dollar threshold, then it's pretty damn sure it's going to start dropping from there. They're trying to avoid that, but we shall see, right? They're not earning it. And again, that brings up one of the points that I want to make. Everybody says about this year end payment. Remember, those rules are there. They're a little confusing, okay? Like they need to pay out by the end of their fiscal year. But does that mean that they also can do it on the calendar year? We're not on fiscal years that end on October 31st. We, as citizens, if we're in the US or Canada or somewhere else or wherever we are in the world, we typically are on a calendar year end, right? So it's still unclear because there are big December payments in a lot of these funds. Well, that would go to the argument is, hey, they're not going to make the October payment or the September payment necessarily big because they got to pay that 90% of the fund. I honestly don't think they have a lot of excess. The, the way they've been managing most of these funds, most of the funds don't have a lot of excess money. And if they do, we'll probably get it in December. So don't sit there and hold your breath and think that, oh man, October is my last chance to get the money. Again, we probably should be asking the companies to explain. I've never felt like EOMax ever tells us. They hide more than they don't. They use that to their advantages, you know. And a lot of them will simply say, all funds. This is what we estimate to be return on capital, but you don't really find that out until you get your 1099s, your dividend statements. Then and even those get revised, right? As an American, you may get one. They're supposed to come out, I think, by January 31st. Let's say you get February 15th. You may get a revised one March 3rd. It's almost like it forces you to file late, pay more for your tax software. Depends if you use an accountant, or for me, I use tax software. So the later I wait, the higher I have to pay for that tax software. You know, it's like a plane. You buy that ticket at very late, you may be sitting next to somebody on the plane and you paid $600 for that flight and they paid $250 because they bought in advance when the capacity was very low. All right. So what do we have here? We have 1172 down from 12 by Rex. Last one here is 57.54. COII's in the middle of the cycle, so nothing to update there. COII, right? The Bitwise is $5, $9, $5, $6. These pay huge payments, and I think they won this one. Let me go over to the competition. Yes, they did. Okay. Now, especially when we're doing 6-4, these out payments, look at this. You know, when you annualize something that only has a basis of 97 days, the up is huge, right? Even though they're eroding 77%, the dividend annualized goes to 279. This will drop. It just drops by the nature of what happens. But when you look at these funds, okay, let's look at the 6-4 guys. We got Rex decently, right? Well, no, look at this. They got the lowest decliner in NAV is Roundhill. So to me, Roundhill's is good. I actually don't own any COIW right now. I own some COYY. But I should flip out of that because of this very factor. I bought a small sample again. I have so little in the income funds, just enough to be savvy to talk about them, to report on them, and actually own something. But they are such a small, I think they're under 10% now of anything I do. And that means that there's more in the metals side than there is in the non-metal side, right? Like SLJY, and I still own GDXY because I look out 5 years and say that's one fund that should be a lot higher in its NAV, even though they have a hard time capturing much, right? You look at year to date on GDX, and then you look at year to date on GDXY, minuscule, right? But you get paid along the way, and I see the payments going up. I'm hoping for $1. It'll probably be in the 85-cent range. We'll see. All right, guys. So again, a couple of good funds. All three of these have potential, but this one always worries me. When you outsize pay, and we'll see what happens to Bitwise. The problem is we don't see it often enough. It's on a monthly basis. All right, guys, that's what I got for you. Again, the Patreon, if you're interested. This I'm starting to do. Guys, it's a little long in the wind, but I think a lot of you know my rants. I try to educate you as much as I can. That's what I am about. It's the value I bring with 45 years in the market. Seen a lot, been there, done that. All right, guys, good luck to all of you. Have a great rest of the week. Be careful in the markets. I feel like any day this thing can turn and have the insiders dump on us. All right, guys, have a great one. This is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Bye for now.